Hi there, this is Jason with PurpleSec, and in this short video, we're going to explain how often you should perform a network vulnerability scan for your business. First, we're going to briefly explain what a vulnerability scan is and what it accomplishes. Next, we'll discuss how often businesses should perform vulnerability scans. Finally, we'll talk about the different factors that determine how frequently scans should be performed. A vulnerability scan uses a software tool to identify security vulnerabilities in systems or networks. For example, a mission-critical server could be running an application with an out-of-date software that developers have since released a patch for security purposes. If a malicious threat actor learns about this vulnerability, they may attempt to exploit the weakness in the code to enter your network. From there, they can run any number of attacks to escalate their privileges, steal data, or otherwise compromise your network. Once a scan is complete, vulnerabilities are quantified and categorized based on risk factors: critical, high, medium, low, or informational. Every vulnerability scan should include an assessment or report, which provides recommendations and remediation planning. The scan itself will provide a raw report of known vulnerabilities identified. However, a trained security professional is recommended to analyze the results in order to make informed business decisions. Ultimately, vulnerability scans are an essential component of any cybersecurity program, as they provide an additional layer of defense against malicious threat actors. While every business need is different, it's best practice to perform network vulnerability scans at least once per quarter. Cyber attacks and threats are constantly evolving, and quarterly scans provide adequate coverage for most businesses to keep up with the changing landscapes. Updates can then be implemented into your monthly patch window, or hot-fixed when critical, to mitigate the risk of exposure. It's important to note that just because a vulnerability exists, it does not mean that threat actors have the knowledge of its existence or the means to exploit it. There are three major factors that determine how often your business should perform a vulnerability scan, including risk tolerance, compliance, and major infrastructure, software, or patch changes. Beginning with risk tolerance, you have to assess what it is you're trying to protect, its value, and how much it is worth protecting. For example, what would you be willing to spend to ensure an e-commerce website that generates $1 million in monthly revenue remains functional? In this case, it is typical to perform a risk assessment to categorize and prioritize these types of risks. This will help guide the planning and implementation phases when addressing areas of concern. It's important to consider the worst possible outcomes when performing these assessments. For instance, what would be the cost to your business if a database hosting intellectual property or sensitive customer data were completely stolen and access was blocked? How would that impact the reputation to your company? What would that impact be on your revenues? Next, quantify that information as best you can into a dollar value to represent the damage of a cyber attack. This threshold will determine many of your security decisions, including how often you perform network vulnerability scans. Depending on the type of information you store or transfer and its value, you may want to perform scans at least once per month. Compliance plays a big role in getting businesses to perform network vulnerability scans on a regular basis. ISO 27001, for example, requires external and internal scans be performed quarterly. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, does not have a requirement. However, they place heavy emphasis on the risk assessment process, which often includes a scan. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, governed the use of data between vendors or contractors and government agencies. It's not unusual for NIST to require monthly or even weekly scans depending on the type of data being stored or accessed. Finally, the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, or PCI DSS, requires quarterly external and internal scans. However, they must be performed by an approved vendor. Ensuring adequate security after any major infrastructure, software, or patch deployment is not easy. Whether it be transitioning to another email provider, implementing a new CRM, or purchasing new networking equipment, there's a lot of diligent work to be done without corrupting the everyday flow of business activities. Not only will the new implementation need to be functional, but it must also be secure. Performing a network vulnerability scan and assessment after making any significant changes to the environment will help to ensure that nothing is missed. Vulnerability scans help to identify and categorize risk on a system, with the goal of prioritizing and locking down those weaknesses. It is best practice for businesses to perform network vulnerability scans at least quarterly. However, they may be subject to weekly, monthly, biannual, or annual requirements. Factors including risk tolerance, compliance, and major changes to an environment all factor in determining the frequency requirements.